I am Tom. I was 35, a life filled with ups and downs, much of it spent under the golden glow of my father's inheritance and the shadow of an old, hidden secret. Here, in this village, my family and I were farmers and herders. My father was wealthy, his land stretching to the horizon. We lived in comfort, accustomed to it since childhood. I had two younger brothers, William, 34, and James, 33. We formed a perfect triangle of power and wealth. But 15 years ago, that triangle should have been a square if fate had taken a different turn. When I was 20, an unwanted event occurred. My mother became pregnant. Neither my parents nor any of us had planned for a fourth child. My father was bedridden, and the doctors said he might not survive more than a few months. 7 months into my mother's pregnancy, she named her premature child Lucas. It wasn't long before my father succumbed to his illness. After his funeral, I decided Lucas had to be removed so he would inherit nothing. I shared my plan with William and James, and they agreed. We all decided that, in order to divide our father's inheritance only among the three of us and gain more wealth, Lucas had to die. There was an old well in the village, its water poisoned by a deadly plant. Black and foul-smelling, it was utterly unusable. I carefully drew some of that poisonous water and poured it into my mother's cup of coffee. She drank it, numb with grief over my father's death. That night, the miscarriage occurred. Lucas died. We buried him. My mother cried from dawn till dusk, her wails filling the house, keeping her away from farm and livestock work. But the three of us, in private, were happy. Yes, we were glad that our father's inheritance was now divided only among us. Yet my mother's grief was unbearable. She died of sorrow for Lucas, weak and worn out. We buried her as well. Then came the inheritance. Thousands of acres of farmland, countless cows and sheep. Our wealth was such that we decided to end the partnership and manage separately, each ruling our own domain. We were rich, but beneath that comfort lay a bitter, dark truth. 15 years passed, and the three of us continued living in that same village. Only shadows melting into darkness. Under the heavy shadow of our guilt, that night, the village slept in absolute silence. Silence that was suddenly shattered by a single sound. A scream, a terrifying, high-pitched cry coming from the throat of an infant. But it was not the cry of hunger or need. It was the scream of torment. A sharp, unrelenting wail, as if the spirit of a tortured being was moaning. The cry was so loud and powerful that it awoke the entire village in panic. I leapt from my bed, my heart pounding wildly in my chest. My wife was terrified, trembling as she asked me what could possibly be making that horrific sound. I had no answer. My mind was blank. I could not understand whose baby it was or why it was wailing like that. We rushed out of the house. The streets were filled with villagers. men and women alike, confused and frightened, eyes wide, asking one another, "Whose voice is that? Where is it coming from?" But no one knew the answer. I saw William and James approaching with lanterns, their faces pale with fear. William asked in a hoarse whisper, "Tom, where the hell is that sound coming from?" I feigned ignorance. The men of the village decided we had to find the source of this horrifying cry at any cost. We grabbed our lanterns and set off. Our terrified wives and children, unwilling to stay behind alone, followed reluctantly. In the darkness, the cries continued. Torment, torment. They seemed to chant endlessly. We searched the entire village, houses, barns, stables. No trace of the source. We decided to extend the search beyond the village. Forest, hills, fields, step by step, every corner under the flickering lantern light. But the source remained invisible. Meanwhile, the sky intensified our fear. Lightning struck violently, one after another, and the thunder roared, amplifying our terror 100-fold. Panic reached its peak. Some children, terrified by the storm and the fear of the adults, began to cry. Parents tried to soothe them in their arms, though they themselves were desperate for calm. Our efforts continued until finally, our path led us to a familiar point toward the west of the village. We realized the crying, now very clear and close, was coming from the end of the same poisoned well. A well that after 15 years had completely dried up. We all rushed to the stone mouth of the well. We tried to see the bottom with the lanterns, but it was too deep. The light reached halfway down and then disappeared. We shouted to the owner of that cry, asking, "Who are you? Why are you crying?" But the infant did not answer. Only the screams and wails continued. At that moment, William whispered with a trembling voice, "It must be the spirit of the aborted baby." Suddenly, everyone remembered 2 months ago. That couple in our village had argued over the man's debts. In that conflict, the man accidentally struck, caused the miscarriage and death of his pregnant wife. Before this incident, the man had repeatedly asked all of us for help in paying his debt, but none of us had assisted him. Now, we all felt responsible for the baby's death, thinking that if we had helped its father, the conflict and miscarriage would not have occurred. We now believed that this crying was from the baby who had died 2 months ago due to the dispute between its parents. Its cries and wails were out of anger. It was furious with us for our inaction, for not helping its father, which had led to the miscarriage. Fear now had an explanation. This baby was suffering because of the village's collective guilt. We decided to go to the baby's grave as soon as possible, to beg for forgiveness and ask it to stop crying. With lanterns in hand and amidst the angry sounds of thunder and lightning, we set off toward the village cemetery. The heavy, turbulent atmosphere foretold an impending disaster. As we approached the cemetery. Terror reached its peak. Several women in the village, including a neighbor's wife, fainted in fear. Their husbands rushed to help, splashing water on their faces and even slapping them to bring them back to consciousness. Entering that place on such a night was unbearable for them. After the women regained consciousness, some villagers suggested postponing the task until morning. "Let's go during the day. Maybe our fear will lessen and we can enter the cemetery more easily." But James suddenly shouted, opposing them. His voice trembled with anger and fear. "No! If we delay, the baby will become even angrier with us. Its spirit will bring a curse upon us we cannot undo. We must enter the cemetery now and calm it." Although the villagers were shaking and terrified, unable to summon the courage to enter the cemetery, they had no choice but to follow James's warning. We had to go in. Fear had penetrated all of us so deeply that our legs felt weak and lifeless. With each step, the ground seemed to vanish beneath us. Our faces had turned pale from terror. We trudged forward, barely able to lift our feet. We entered the cemetery, hearts pounding, and stood beside the grave of the baby who had died 2 months ago. All of us knelt in supplication, begging for forgiveness and asking the crying to cease. Our wives, in despair, cried and pleaded with the baby not to cry anymore. While we were pleading, William suddenly noticed something. Fear had widened his eyes. With a trembling hand, he pointed, stammering, I see it. I see it." William's scream and panic doubled our terror. We all looked in the direction he pointed, but saw nothing. I asked him what he saw. In a barely audible voice, William said he had seen the spirit of the crying baby. His claim choked the terror in our throats. We could barely breathe. At that moment, all the mothers, terrified that the baby's spirit might harm their children, immediately clutched them tightly. Suddenly, another villager shouted. He too had seen the spirit from another direction, pointing and screaming in fear. "There! It's standing there! There it is!" We all looked that way, and finally, we saw it. The spirit of a small infant stood there, its body soaked in blood, crying and wailing violently. In its distress and agony, it clawed at its own face, tearing its skin. The sight of the spirit was apocalyptic. Absolute terror commanded us to flee. We all ran madly toward the village. Everyone fled in different directions. Some men abandoned their wives to save themselves. Several women, running in panic, lost their balance and fell. Their husbands rushed to help them up, and they resumed fleeing. I, William, and James, along with our wives, ran through the darkness and rain toward our homes. We all reached the village. In total chaos, everyone quickly entered their homes. Terrified, we locked doors and windows. My wife and I locked ourselves in, and she, crying in fear, begged me to draw the curtains so nothing outside could be seen. I drew all the curtains, held her, and tried to reassure her that she would not be alone. But the baby's cries and wails could still be heard, fainter, yet more horrifying. Suddenly, the sound of horses' neighs pierced the village. The horses, terrified by the crying, bolted. The sounds of breaking wood and hooves pounding violently on the ground. Stable doors broke, and the horses ran free. No one dared leave their homes to stop their horses. Everyone had taken shelter inside. The sky continued to flash with lightning, and the deafening thunder fell upon us like a hammer. My wife begged me not to leave her alone. That terrible night finally ended. At dawn, the village had fallen into a deadly silence. The fear was so overwhelming that no one dared return to their daily work. Farming, herding, everything had been abandoned. Not a single person went searching for their runaway horse. But by afternoon, something strange happened. All the horses that had bolted in terror slowly began returning to their owners. All except ours. Mine, William's, and James's horses never came back. The villagers began asking why only our 3 horses had failed to return. We ourselves wondered the same. But at that moment, the only thing that mattered was making sure the infant spirit would not harm us. The missing horses were a secondary concern. A few hours later, I heard my dog barking. My wife and I cautiously stepped outside. There he was, standing in front of our home, barking relentlessly. It was clear he was trying to get my attention, urging me to follow him. I was too afraid to go alone. I quickly fetched William and James and asked them to come with me. They agreed. A group of villagers who had heard my dog barking begged us not to go. They feared the infant spirit was using my dog as bait. But I trusted my dog. Ignoring the warnings, the 3 of us followed him. We walked in fear, scanning every shadow, preparing for an attack from the spirit. We left the village behind. As we continued, something appeared in the distance. Our horses. They were lying in the field, covered in blood, slaughtered, and lifeless. My dog had been trying to alert us to this horror. We ran toward them. When we reached the bodies, terror consumed us. Our horses had been brutally butchered, while all the others in the village had returned unharmed. With a trembling voice, William whispered, "This is a message. The spirit of that infant has killed our horses to warn us. He's furious with the 3 of us. He's planning to bring disaster upon us and upon our wives." James, frozen with fear, begged us to go home immediately. We ran back to our houses as fast as we could. At William's request, we decided not to tell anyone about the slaughter. We didn't want the villagers to think the infant spirit had a personal grudge against us. Night fell again. A deathly silence covered the village, until the same horrifying, tortured crying tore through the air once more. My wife and I jolted awake. She collapsed to her knees, sobbing, begging God to protect us from the infant spirit. I slowly approached the window. Through the slit in the curtains, I saw the villagers staggering out of their homes in terror, confused and helpless, not knowing what to do. My wife and I ran outside, trembling. William and James joined us moments later. Trying to hold on to hope, William said, "We must beg the mother's forgiveness. Maybe she can calm her child's spirit and protect us." Everyone agreed. We decided to return to the cemetery. We told our wives and children to stay home this time. We men, lanterns in hand, set out once again. Our steps were slow and unsteady. Fear pressed on our chests as we walked, expecting the spirit to leap at us from the dark at any moment. We reached the cemetery. The infant's cries were still there, constant, sharp, and merciless. We stood beside the mother's grave, pleading desperately for her to soothe her child and protect us, our wives, our children, from whatever disaster was coming. As we begged, one of the villagers suddenly appeared, sprinting toward us in sheer panic. His screams echoed between the tombstones. "It's full of blood! Full of blood!" We stared at him in terror. When he reached us, he was gasping so violently he could barely speak. "What's full of blood?" we asked. Struggling for breath, he finally managed to say that the river near the village had turned to blood. Fear exploded among us. This was no longer merely crying. This was catastrophe. Some said we shouldn't go near the river. Others insisted we had to see the truth with our own eyes. In the end, dread and curiosity pushed us forward. We hurried toward the river. When we arrived, the sight shattered us. The river's water had become pure blood, not stained, transformed. We all knew the spirit was responsible. Its vengeance was escalating. Terrified, we rushed back home. When I told my wife about the river of blood, she broke down in panic. I held her tightly, trying to calm her, but nothing helped. She had every right to fear. This nightmare had reached a level none of us could comprehend. Another night fell. Rain poured violently, each drop striking the earth like a drumbeat of doom. Yet even the fury of the storm couldn't drown out the cries. Lucas's wailing once again swallowed the village. My wife couldn't bear it anymore. She pressed her hands tightly against her ears, trying to block out the infant's tortured screams as they clawed through the night. Hours later, amid the sound of rain and crying, a terrified man from the village began screaming. He repeated over and over, "Blood, blood." My wife and I rushed to the window and drew the curtain aside slightly. In disbelief, we saw that beneath the pouring rain, blood was flowing across the ground like a narrow red river. We quickly ran outside. All the villagers, equally terrified, had come out of their homes and stared at the moving river of blood. This river had formed due to the heavy rainfall, but the reason it was blood red was beyond anyone's comprehension. One of the men, his voice trembling, said, "We must follow the trail of blood to see where it leads." Everyone agreed, Again, our wives and children stayed inside, and we men, lanterns in hand and shaken with fear, followed the blood trail. We were drenched by the relentless rain. As we followed the path in terror, we scanned around us constantly, fearful of seeing the infant spirit. In our minds, the blood was still thought to come from that aborted infant, angry with us. The trail of blood led us to the cemetery. There, under the flickering lantern light and the pounding rain, we were shocked and horrified to realize that the blood was flowing from our brother Lucas's grave. William, James, and I froze in terror. We could no longer hide it. The blood seeping from Lucas's grave, mixing with the rainwater, explained the formation of the bloody river in the village. At that moment, after 15 years, all the bitter memories returned. Lucas, our brother, whom we had killed ourselves out of greed. It became clear to the entire village that the horrifying cries of the infant belonged to Lucas. The villagers stared at us in shock. They could not understand why Lucas cried and suffered each night, or why blood was emerging from his grave. In fear and anger, they asked us, "Why does Lucas cry? Why is his grave bleeding?" We three could only claim ignorance, unable to offer any explanation. We quickly returned to our homes. I explained to my wife that the bloody river was caused by blood flowing from Lucas's grave, and that the horrifying cries belonged to him. In a house now steeped in lies and guilt, our fear had reached a new, intensely personal level. My wife had been unable to sleep for nights, paralyzed by fear. Her body weakened. In the bedroom, I tried to soothe her, hoping to help her rest and relieve some of the physical strain, when suddenly she screamed in absolute terror. She was staring out the window. I followed her gaze, and outside, behind the glass, I saw Lucas's spirit. He stood there, drenched in blood, his tiny, premature body. But this time, he was not crying. He stared at me with a horrifying, sinister smile, showing the slightest twitch of pleasure at my torment. Lucas, his gaze fixed on me, spoke in that same anguished yet firm voice. "Tom, you killed me." Overcome with despair and guilt, I began to cry. I shouted at him, begging desperately for forgiveness and for him to leave us alone. But he ignored my pleas, laughing wickedly, repeating, "Tom, you killed me." I could no longer bear it. Anger overcame fear. I grabbed a nearby vase with all my strength and hurled it at his spirit. Before it could hit him, Lucas vanished. The vase smashed against the window, shattering the glass. I went to the window, searching the darkness for Lucas. He was gone. But I noticed the villagers. They were all standing behind their windows, staring at my house. It was now clear to them that Lucas's spirit held a personal grudge against me, William, and James. They opened their windows, shouting at me in anger, demanding that we leave the village immediately, and move to the city or elsewhere to calm Lucas's spirit and prevent disaster. But I refuse their request. We will not leave the village. William, however, could not endure it. Fear for himself and his wife had overwhelmed him. That very night, he decided to permanently leave the village. They set out to escape. Hours later, terrifying pounding came at my door, a frantic knocking, as if the person outside were striking it madly in terror. I opened the door. It was William's wife, frantic, disheveled, her clothes soaked in blood. Fear surged through my veins again. I knew something horrific had happened. In a trembling, fragmented voice, she said, "We were leaving the village with William when Lucas's spirit attacked him. He laughed at him, butchered him, and killed him." I quickly informed James, and the two of us rushed toward William in my car. Our hearts pounded with fear. James begged in terror to return home, but I refused. We were on the road, out of the village, when suddenly, my car lights went out. In the dead of night, I could not see the road. James stuttered, "It's Lucas. He doesn't want us to find him." Angrily, I shouted at James and told him to use his phone's flashlight to illuminate the path. Terrified, he barely lowered the window and with his trembling light, managed to light the way ahead so I could continue driving. Finally, we arrived at the scene. William's body, horrifically butchered, hung from a tree. His blood had dried on the trunk. We both froze at the sight. James screamed in sheer terror, "Run, Tom, run!" I sped the car back toward the village in a frenzy. We now knew Lucas had begun his revenge. Only two of us remained, James and me. The next day, the village's fear turned into anger. Villagers threw stones, breaking the windows of James's and my house. They shouted with hatred, warning us that we had to leave the village forever, or they would take matters into their own hands. I still refused to leave the village, knowing that fleeing would be futile. Night fell. Once again, Lucas's terrifying cries filled the village. This time, however, the tone of the cries was different. Among the wails, Lucas was asking for help. He did not call anyone by name. He just wanted help. James, my last brother, had gone completely mad with fear. He decided to help Lucas's spirit and do whatever Lucas demanded, in the vain hope that he might be forgiven. I begged him not to approach Lucas and not to risk his life, but he refused. Though I inwardly opposed going to Lucas and the water well, I had no choice but to. James and I reached the dried-up water well. The sound of Lucas's spirit echoing from the bottom of the well asked for our help. "Come down into the well so I can be calm." I shone my flashlight into the well. No matter how hard I tried, I could not see the bottom. The well was too deep, and the light did not reach its end. Despite being terrified, James was determined to descend. He believed that by calming Lucas's spirit, he could escape his revenge. No matter how much I opposed and tried to stop him, it was useless. Using a rope I had tied around him, James slowly descended toward the bottom of the well with my help. Moment by moment, his shadow disappeared into the darkness. Minutes later, the cries for help from Lucas ceased. I screamed for James. "James, James!" But he did not answer. Fear froze my entire being. I was sure that Lucas's spirit had done something to him. Trembling, I asked Lucas, "Why isn't James answering? What did you do to him?" Lucas gave no reply. The only sound rising from the dark well was his devilish laughter, filled with the pleasure of revenge. There was nothing I could do. James was dead. I had no choice but to leave him, and before Lucas could harm me, I ran quickly toward the house. Now I was the last one left. Several nights passed. During all these nights, Lucas's spirit roamed the village, but he no longer cried. It was a continuous wail. He said he was thirsty and constantly demanded water from me. I knew it was a trap. I knew he was using the pretense of thirst to harm me, and that's why I ignored his requests in the previous nights. That night, my wife and I decided we would somehow sleep to escape the nightmare. We both took sleeping pills and fell asleep. Hours later, while in a deep sleep, I felt cold drops of water falling on my face. I woke up. At first, I thought the roof had a leak from the rain. I turned on the room light, and terror tore through me. Blood was dripping from the ceiling all over the house. Thick droplets fell on my face. I screamed. My wife woke up from my scream. Seeing the blood streaming from the ceiling, she was terrified. Desperately and screaming, she begged Lucas's spirit not to torment us and to leave us alone. Meanwhile, written in blood on the bedroom wall appeared, "If you don't give me water, I will kill you." I had no choice. I was forced to give water to Lucas's spirit to prevent him from harming my wife and me. I went outside. The rain was pouring heavily. Lantern in hand, my heart racing from fear, I made my way to the well. I reached the well and with a trembling voice told Lucas I had brought water. Lucas's voice echoed from the depths. "Come to the bottom of the well and give me the bottle of water." I refused. "I will throw the bottle down to you." "I am not going down," Lucas insisted. "You must bring the bottle down yourself and give it to me." Again, I refused. At that moment, a powerful force suddenly pushed me, and with a terrible scream, I fell into the well. Hitting the bottom, my entire body ached. Terrified, I clawed at the walls to climb out, but it was impossible. The well was deep, and escape was hopeless. I gave up and begged Lucas not to kill me. Lucas told me to go to the end of the cave. I realized that the bottom of the well led through a long, dark tunnel to a deep cave. Reluctantly, I walked through that terrifying passage to reach the cave, where suddenly I saw James's bones. All his flesh had been eaten, leaving only his white skeleton. Seeing his gruesome death, my fear was so intense I felt I was having a heart attack. Passing through that dreadful tunnel, I reached the cave. I could not see Lucas. I called for him. Suddenly, I heard Lucas's voice behind me. I turned and saw his spirit behind me. Tearfully and desperately, I begged him not to kill me. Lucas demanded I drink the water from the bottle on the ground. I noticed a blue bottle beside me. I asked him, "You have water yourself. Why did you ask me to bring it?" Lucas gave no answer and screamed again for me to drink the water. I knew drinking it would harm me, but I had no choice. I knew that if I did not drink, Lucas's spirit would butcher me like he had James and William. Reluctantly, I picked up the bottle and drank some of the water. Immediately, it felt as if I had swallowed molten fire. My insides burned painfully. I told Lucas, "It's burning inside me." Lucas only laughed wickedly. Blood poured from my mouth. I felt my body melting. I could no longer stand and collapsed to the ground. Lucas stood over me, his eyes glowing with vengeful rage, and spoke coldly. "This is the water you gave our mother for aborting me." Gradually, my entire body melted, and Lucas's spirit took a gruesome revenge on his last accomplice for the brother they had killed out of greed.